Howdy, howdy, folks. Bill here from CoolWildlife.com, and this one's for all you folks that are shooting with a Nikon Z9 and are into bird photography. What I'm bringing to you is a panel discussion with 4 bird photographers who have over 100 years of Nikon shooting experience collectively and have owned the Nikon Z9 now for a few months. So you're going to learn about custom controls, how to set up your function buttons, what autofocus settings are best for birds in photography in different situations, field craft, shutter speeds, how to use 120 frames per second to your advantage for wing positions, and a lot more. So stay tuned. It's going to be a good one.
Okay, so thank you all for this panel discussion about birding photography. We have a panel of luminaries who are experts in wildlife and birding. And this is being hosted by the Nikon Z9 User Experience Pro Group. And how the idea came about was Bill actually posted something about, I'm happy to talk more or share more about how he did one of the shots. And I asked him if he was, implying he would like to host the talk, which I'm glad that he agreed to. And now we have a number of other expert panelists coming on. So basically, this is a talk about using the camera. Nikon, most of us will have a Z9, but it's not necessarily has to be a Z9 for this, to attend this talk, because everyone's going to be talking about many different things regarding birding photography. Stay tuned to the Z9 group, however, because we're going to be having a talk on our general Z9 camera operations discussion, along with a number of draw prizes. So I have the memory cards and swag from Angelbird, as well as Rogue, as well as Photo Mechanic to award for our next talk, which will be at the end of April or the middle of April at some point. So without further ado, I'll name off our speakers, but each of our speakers will give a small bio of themselves. And we have an agenda that we made out for today as well. Let me see if I can... I'll talk about the agenda right now, but really, it's just to give you guys an idea of what we'll be talking about. So first, the speakers we have are Bill Maynard, Bogar Tessem, Stephen Kersting, and Tommy Nguyen. And they will each give a small bio, or introduction. And we have 5 topics that we've previously met and talked about for what would be relevant for today's talk. Starting with the field craft, basically what best practices are. We'll be talking about how the Z9 has some special abilities with the frame rates to get the shots you want. We'll be talking about autofocus. We'll be talking about shutter speeds. And one of, it seems, everyone's favorite topics, custom function buttons, because our camera has shortcuts for us to get the shot we want, depending how you set up the camera. So without further ado, why don't we do some introductions?
Yeah, my name is Borgar. It's quite difficult for native English speakers to pronounce my name. I'm 47, from a small town in Norway. Been using Nikons for 32 years. Got my first camera when I was just in my early teens, after harassing my parents for a long time to get it. And I took my diploma as a photographer when I was 20. That was just when the digital era started, so none in Norway wanted to rent any photographers at all, because everyone thought they could manage to do everything themselves. So it took some 10 years before I really started to do photography for portraits, weddings, and stuff like that. And yeah, I just went for wildlife photo as recreation in the beginning. and then now it's my paycheck maker.
Good for you. Congratulations. You're living the dream.
Yeah, not too many people can actually make a living doing it.
No.
Not from the photography.
Yeah, the main reason I can have a living of it is that there's still in Norway a good tradition by companies that they buy calendars, so I make a lot of calendars. And that's the reason I can live of it.
So my name is Tommy Nguyen, and I'm one of the Nikon professional. Been shooting for more than 15 years, mainly wildlife, and my passion is to teach photography the right way, I guess you can say. And as most of you know, I am also a Pro Media Gear ambassador. So we focusing mainly on tripod and camera gear, but so that's pretty much it. You guys have any question? Just feel free to ask.
They'll have lots of questions for you about your ospreys, Tommy, but we'll get to that.
Okay, sounds good. But yeah.
Excellent. And I'm Bill Maynard out of Ottawa, Ontario, Canada. I've probably been shooting Nikon for about 30 odd years, starting back in I think it was a 5700 or something like that back in the day, maybe 4 megapixels. Probably may know me as coolwildlife.com or coolwildlife1 on my YouTube channel. I started out in landscape, but now I'm primarily pretty much wildlife. And that's my story. Stephen, over to you.
Yeah, Stephen Kersting. I'm in Pennsylvania, Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. I've been a Nikon photographer for a bit over 40 years, maybe 45, I'm not sure. And my business these days is making accessories and equipment for wildlife photography. So I don't make my living off of the photography itself. But anyways, I wanted to kick this off with a little bit of a story and how I got that picture kind of thing. And it's about a Blackburnian warbler photo I've been trying to get. And I tried to get this bird for about 2 years. It took me to get the picture, my first picture anyways. In order to get that picture, I had to first learn where they might be found, when they might be found, what kind of habitat they like to be in, when they were passing through my area, and what the bird call sounded like. And once I had learned all that, I was at my cabin up in upstate New York, and I was out on the deck, and I heard what I swore was probably a Blackburnian warbler. And then I knew that across the stream from my cabin was a little hemlock stand. And I knew they liked those kind of trees. So I went across and I found them. So the point of that whole story is gear matters, but fieldcraft matters more. And you got to put in the time. You got to learn the habits. You got to put in the time just out in the field, because when you're dealing with Mother Nature, a good bit of luck is involved often. And you need the knowledge. And if you don't have the knowledge, you can pay for it by going on a tour or something. But fieldcraft, equipment won't make a difference if you don't get the chance.
I'm with Steve on that one. I mean, literally, to me, technique is only 30%. That's including you have to understand your gear and of course, composition and everything. But 60% is really know your subject. Because you're a step ahead, you always get a shot.
Now, what I like about that shot, Stephen, is the bokeh on that, right? There's no distraction in the background of that image. Oftentimes, when I'm trying to shoot small birds, I'm seeing the bright light coming through the trees in the background, which distracts from the bird itself. But you've got that nicely framed up with a lovely soft background.
Well, that goes to the whole luck with dealing with Mother Nature thing too. I find a lot of times with even with wildlife, if you want a really good picture, you have to kind of pick the setting in the background first, and then hope the wildlife cooperates. You know, if you're just always trying to grab whatever's offered to you, then you're just kind of getting whatever's.
Yeah, I agree. Oftentimes when I'm out in my kayak early in the morning, we get reflections off the shoreline, and I do exactly what you said. I'll wait in my kayak for the bird to come in front of that reflection, as opposed to trying to chase after them and shoot what I can, because the ripples on the water and things just don't present. I mean, you'll get a picture of a loon or a swan, or I have trumpeter swans, herons and loons, but it's the ones in the reflection with the green from shoreline or the golden looks that really pop by comparison to just chasing them down the middle of the lake.
I think that's the difference between a record shot and a shot you're really proud of in the end, is the planning, I guess, you know, the forethought, the picturing what you want to have, and then waiting for that to happen for you, as opposed to just chasing whatever's offered. So it's kind of like when you build your portfolio, you start out, the first chance you get, you take the shot.
Yeah.
You know, then the next chance you get, you try to get a little better picture. And you can afford to do that because you've already got the one.
Yeah.
But this is the same as I've always said, at least the last year, that being prepared and know the behavior of what you want to take pictures of, that's gonna make your success rate go high up compared to just walk around.
Totally agree. Any questions? Are we doing questions from the audience, Ronald, or you want to hold that?
We are doing questions as we go because we're changing topics. So
yeah, okay.
To keep them all. One question right off the bat is, how do you prepare for a birding shoot? From what time do you wake up? How far do you go? And what do you, like, are you guys hiding? Are you guys standing up? You know, basically, how do you go from waking up to getting that shot? It's what I think some people are wondering.
It really depends on what the species you're going after is, and of course how far you have to travel to get there. Like me, I have a little 4-wheel drive Mitsubishi van I imported from Japan that I have a camper set up in the back of it. So a lot of times I'll drive out there and stay overnight, so I don't have to get up too early and make a long drive just to get to the location in the morning. And then, you know, it depends, but for most wildlife, you're talking about first thing in the morning, last thing in the day, and that's when, you know, the light's usually the best. So
and a lot of times you need to be on location prior to the sun coming up. I have a heron rookery that I shoot from a blind, but they hear me coming a mile away, so I get into the blind when it's still dark. And then I wait as the sun comes up. And the beauty of the Z9 now is with that silent mode, right? Before, when I started shooting with my D5 with like a machine gun going off, that heron was flushed out of the nest, and I didn't want to do that because she's feeding her chicks, right? So I didn't want to be there. Now I can be silent and observe without disturbing, and they don't really know I'm there because I went in at dark.
To be honest, that's the reason I bought the Z9, is the silent photography, full raw resolution recording. Like, I could do that with my Nikon 1 mirrorless, the V3 I had, or I still have actually, but the full frame sensor capability and the full silent shooting, 20 frames per second, that's because the rattle of those DSLRs lured a lot of wildlife. And that, I guess that's part of the whole thing too, is with the field craft, is you're able to get closer with good field craft, getting there ahead of time so You're there before they wake up. They're not. You're part of the scenery when they wake up, kind of thing. And then you're able to get closer and you get better quality images.
Another thing is letting them take the time and get used to you as well.
Staying in one place.
Yeah, stay in one place and then slowly move forward. Don't just run to them. Because guarantee most of the time will be a butt shot.
How many of you guys wear camouflage? Because most of the time I don't wear camouflage.
No.
Unless it's really cold, and that's only because hunters have better cold weather gear.
Yeah, I mean, it's nice to have your lens camouflaged a little bit, like this one, the 600. But to me, I mean, just don't wear no bright orange. You save that one for landscape or something, you know.
Yeah.
So most of the time, I mean, just wear a darker color like black, gray, just something not too bright, and then trust me, they see you a mile away.
They see you either way, absolutely.
It wouldn't matter of time where you allow them to get to know you and make that approach, That's why I go back to know your subject. It's really important, yeah.
And there are different locations where it doesn't matter near as much.
No, they're more tame. I see what you're saying. Like,
and there's always that, I call them ambassador birds. It's like we have a great horned owl that nests in a very accessible location, extremely accessible, and it gets huge crowds, 15, 20 feet away, taking pictures of it on the nest and stuff. The bird just doesn't care. It's done it for almost 12 years now. Sometimes the animals just don't mind.
Yeah, I have a trumpeter swan in my area that I've followed for the pair for probably now 8 years. And she'll actually even leave the nest now and come over to my kayak and almost signal to me that she's going to go for a little flyby. And I read it as, can you watch the nest while I head out? And she and the male will go for a little flight for about 4 or 5 minutes, and she'll come back and do her honk and hop back up on the nest. But she wasn't doing that in the first year or two, right? They're just very used to me now. I always wear the same clothing, and I'm always in the same kayak with the same setup. So I look the same to whatever, those swans are looking at. They're always looking at the same thing.
Have you guys ever done the stay overnight thing where people stay in the blind for days on end and never
Oh yeah, I had to do that with a lesser Perry chicken. It's it's called lesser Perry chicken.
Oh, Perry chicken, gotcha.
Yeah. Perry chicken, yeah. The place I'm going to is like they so skittish, so we have to literally go out the night before and stay in this. It's a box. It's pretty much a 18-wheeler box that cut out a couple of holes and then got, So the guy was taking us. He's one of the pro as well, and he's retired. So we went in there. There's like no cell phone or anything, and of course we stayed the whole night, all the way. That's including no restroom. So all the way, they don't show up until like 5:40 is 6 o'clock, and as soon as they hear any noise, they gone. so and of course, sometime when the male come, you have like 20 male come, and then there's no female, there's nothing. They just literally just sit around all morning until one female come. That's when the action starts. That's when you in heaven. To be honest, yeah. So there's many times when we had to camp overnight, Rana.
If anyone else has any questions, feel free to just ask. Or if you want to be called on, you can raise your hand. But you can turn on your mic and ask as well.
Well, I still have the question to maybe Tommy about his focusing methods.
Yeah, we have that, I think, in the...
I'm coming up after Bill.
Okay.
After Bill.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah, we'll get there. You want to roll to the next one then, Ronald?
Kevin, you have a question?
Yeah, I was just wondering, how does your approach to birding photography change now that you've using a Z9? I've had a Z9 now for a few months, and I also use a Sony A1, and so I'm going back and forth and using them as tools, but trying each of them and seeing what I like best out of each one. So I'm curious, what does the Z9 do more for you than you've been able to do with other cameras, whether it's just Nikon cameras or anything else that you might have tried, like a Sony A1?
Who want to take this one? No, I can.
Yeah, I think we can all pile on. My next topic is 120 frames per second, which I don't believe you can do with any other camera, and we're going to go through a discussion on that. Silent, which most cameras have now, which was huge for me. And I was in DSLR mode for so many years, being that EVF and seeing the exposure and things, in the camera, as opposed to taking a shot and looking at the histogram and figuring out on the fly where to go with it, are big things for me. Even 20 frames a second is a big change from what we were shooting, if you were down around 12 or 10 or whatever you were shooting with.
14, 15 with D5 and D6, yeah.
Yeah. So,
are you finding any benefits of the Z9 over like a Sony A1? Have you used that? And from my perspective, I think the Sony A1 does a little bit better job on initial acquisition and holding on to the subject. What I really like about the Z9, which is what I've liked about the other Nikons, is the ability to program all the buttons and to be able to quickly switch to another mode by just pushing and holding a button, which is something you can't do on the A1, but you can do some other things with the A1. So that's one of the things I liked. What else do you like that's maybe unique to the Z9 versus just mirrorless in general?
I don't know. I don't know if it's unique, but the eye detect and autofocus, for me at least, in the larger birds that I'm shooting, has been a game changer. Even the Z6 II and 7 II that I was shooting with would not lock on the way the Z9 is and track it through. I struggled with that. I often went back to my D5 when I had those two cameras, especially in low light situations. I really did struggle a little bit with the 6 II and the 7 II.
I agree with you, Bill, in this. I have used Olympus MX1 or 1 M1X, and I used A1, A9. I used Canons just to try. I had to buy everything just to try it. And what makes the big difference for me from A1 to Z9 is the first is ergonomics and the muscle memory from my D5, D6, where pretty much is as I'm used to, so I can find it in the dark. Build quality, because here in Norway the weather is not extremely stable. It's wet, and wet. So I have had trouble with using Sony's, especially the A7 series before, where water came in by the battery compartment and stuff like that. So it's build quality, I will say, is the main reason today. And also that when you are locked on with a Z9, it's quite sticky to be there. But A1 is, the time I used it, it's a slightly better, can I say, a dummy camera. It's doing more by itself to stay on.
Well, Kevin, pretty much end of the day, all the system out there is good. If you stick with, with a Sony A1, Nikon, or even the R5, R3, it's come down to, what do you prefer? Like you say, ergonomic, you prefer Nikon. Most of the tracking system out there right now is up to date. A1 had the best tracking system right now. I mean, everybody can agree to that. So going back to what type of animal are you shooting? I mean, even if you're shooting something so fast that the A1 cannot handle, you're gonna have to go back to the manual tracking yourself, which is single point, focusing point, right? So, I mean, your question is you wanna see which one is better, but technically, which one do you want to use? That's
I
pretty much.
like both of them. I was just curious more from you guys because I don't get to talk to too many folks that have the Z9 yet. Right, there's still a lot of people that want them, and so I was just more. I like both systems. I look at it like it's a tool in my tool belt. Sometimes I think of it's more of the lens with the camera combination. Like, I love the 180 to 400, and that's a gorgeous lens, and nobody has anything like that. And so I use that a lot when I'm doing hummingbirds, for example. I grab the 180 to 400 and the Z9, and that's what I go out to do. And the A1 for some other stuff. I like the light 600. The weight of the 600 millimeter on the A1.
That's right. It's really light. Yes.
If I ever get the 400 TC
f2.8, yeah,
f2.8. I mean, then that's going to be something I'm going to grab a lot more of. So
then you don't have to deal with something like this.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
So it's really just hearing from you guys. I'm not trying to say one is better than the other because I agree they're all really good. But I'm just trying to learn a little bit more of what you find that might be a little more unique about the Z9 that you found to be successful for wildlife photography. That's it.
I don't have enough experience with the other systems other than, helping other people out, teaching people who had the other equipment. I haven't owned a lot of Canon gear or Sony gear. So for me, I can't really speak to how the mirrorless Nikon system compares to those systems. Other than my Nikon 1, which was my little pocket camera system, I've kind of avoided mirrorless up till this point because they didn't have the capabilities. Now, the Sonys did, but I'm just way too invested in the Nikon system. And I've been shooting it for so long that it just makes sense to me. The menus, the controls, everything. When I go to another camera, another system, it's hard for me to know what I'm doing.
Yeah, makes sense.
Why don't we transition to Bill's sequence with the snowy owl? Because this is a feature of the Z9 that most cameras don't have. So Bill, do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, let me throw up why I threw this on the agenda. So even with my 6.2 and 7.2 Nikon cameras, I was playing with some 4K 120 and I was pulling out still frames from video. And when the Z9 came along and I saw all these demo reels of 120 frames per second, and a lot of it was, somebody throwing a football down the field and tracking it for 800 frames, and I started thinking about my own birds in flight photography and thought, I think there's something here. I think that we should be able to use this technology to capture more wing positions was really what I was after, because at least for me, the wing position makes a very big difference in how the in this case, a snowy owl, which will roll through. I gave Ronald about 534 images. And just so you know, at 60 frames a second, at 120 frames per second, it's like a video. You're getting every wing position that you can possibly get. And so I thought, hey, and there you saw him shake his feet. And that's something where I would now look at and go, okay, I've probably got about 7 or 8 shots of those talons coming out, shaking the feet, different wing positions, background is changing perhaps, or the foreground's changing. And so it allowed me to capture things that I couldn't otherwise capture at 20 frames a second or 30 frames per second. So now it is, I think one of the things I hear from people a lot is, well, it's an 11 megapixel file. Why would you want to do that instead of 45 megapixels? in one of the videos that I did, my process was to run it through DxO Pure Raw 2 and then put it in through, once I brought it in as a DNG into Adobe, I can work it like any other file, not a JPEG file, because this is a JPEG. And then I'm able to bring it into Photoshop in a RAW format, process it, and then bring it out through Topaz Gigapixel to come up with an image. The DNG goes out at 65 megabytes compared to the 3.4 megabytes that the JPEG file is. And then even a 2 times or 4 times in Topaz takes it out to being, I think I have it at 160 megabyte file from this. So I don't find that to be a limitation for the benefit of having the wing positions that I wouldn't otherwise get. So the other thing I was considering was, well, do I have to have a fast memory card for this? But at 120 frames a second and each one is 3.4 megabytes, you're only pushing out 408 megabytes per second, which even an XQD card may be able to keep up to that rate. Right, so you don't have to go invest in a $600 CF Express card if you didn't have one, or you're carried over some of your XQDs. And I compare that, if we get into the lossless compressed at 45 megapixels, it's throwing off something like 1,700 megabytes per second. Well, that's when your frame rates and your shot, you're going to take a burst of 6 seconds, you're going to run up it in 80 shots, you're going to run into your burst. So at 120, I had no problem. I had CF Express cards in my camera, but at 408 megabytes per second, you can track to infinite. I never ran into a situation where I ran into buffering. Stephen, you're on mute.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I think the one thing that the 120 frames per second really gives an advantage to is not having to try to time the shot as well. Is back with the 12 frames per second, 20 frames, even 20 frames per second. If you're trying to get that split second when the bird hits the water or that specific wing position and stuff, you had to time it. You had to, and I was convinced that the image I wanted didn't exist. It never happened. It was always between frames, no matter how many I had per second. But with 120, you're right there, and there's nothing you miss.
Yeah, and I was very pleasantly surprised that because I did about a 6-second burst, which lent itself to somewhere around 720 frames. So it never lost the eye. Now we can argue, Stephen, perhaps, was it focused on the eye? Was it focused on the head? I was in wide area large, but here's what I'm talking about with the talons, right? I've got different talon positions and wing positions happening that I would not get at 20 frames a second.
Right.
And it locked on and followed the bird the whole way in wide area large, which I thought was phenomenal. It never missed a beat, the whole sequence of a 720 frames. The downside of shooting 120 frames is culling 720 images and deciding, well, which one is the best one? But you sure have choice.
Yep.
Did you have to use the tripod on this one, or you just handheld, Bill?
This is handheld.
Nice.
I am not shooting. I don't shoot a lot of birds unless I'm doing video. I'm hand holding most of the time.
Same here. I
And
agree.
this was with the 500 PF. I was shooting back and forth with the 100 to 400, the new Z100 to 400, and the 500 PF. But this sequence was with the 500 PF, which paired with the Z9 is a phenomenal combination.
I think so too. Yes.
And to go back to your other comment about the resolution, this 11 megapixels, but you have to really consider what you're going to do with these images. Like, a lot of people don't do much with them other than print them small for themselves. I mean, 11 megapixels, you can print 18 by 24, 16 by 24, whatever, just fine. And if you're just putting it online at 2048 RAW long edge, that's 2 megapixels, 4 megapixels worth of resolution online. So, I mean, you've got more than enough for most uses out of an 11 megapixel JPEG.
So that was my experiment. The issue I was having pulling still frames out of video was that I couldn't get I didn't want to take the shutter speed high enough such that I would not end up with a nice video, but anything with action, the wings were blurred. Now, if you wanted intentional blur, then that's fine, but I really couldn't freeze the action. Like that frame's taken at 1/3200th of a second, which is my go-to sort of large bird in flight for snowies if I can get it and the light is right, but I couldn't freeze it with the video and pull the frame out. So that's why I thought I'm going to shoot 120 frames per second and just do stills and see what happens, and I was pleasantly surprised.
Well, the 4K video is what's the resolution on 4K? 8 megapixels? Somewhere around there.
I don't know the answer to that. I look at.
I know the 8K is up in the 30 megapixels, but it'll only do 30
Oh,
frames
it'll
per
pull.
second.
Yeah, 8K will pull a 33 megapixel because that's
right.
what I was
But
pulling.
it'll only do 30 frames per second.
Yeah. Right now until the upgrade, we get 60.
Okay.
That's on the way, apparently. Yeah.
There's nothing that's going to get you 120 frames per second at any better resolution.
No. And I will experiment with the 60 when it comes out with the 8K, because 33 megapixel file coming out of that 8K 30 is pretty nice too. Especially like I've had a Merlin. I posted up a video with a Merlin, and it was still in the tree, and you can pull an image out and blow it up quite nicely.
So Tommy, do you want to talk about your autofocus? And I'm interested in hearing, like you switch autofocuses in the middle of your shots. That's interesting to me as well.
So I'll go ahead and start out with, tracking. Since I got my Z9, also thanks to my local store, a good friend of mine, Eugene, with Competitive Camera Store, was able to get me the Z9 before my bald eagle trip. And I really wanted to test the autofocus tracking system on the Z9. Although, do I really use it as often that I should? Not really, but the new technology that just watching Nikon finally caught up with the auto company was really interesting to me. So I took it out. I tested on, bald eagle flying across during the snowstorm, right? And I backlit. So I was like, okay, I noticed, the Z9, I guess you can say animal tracking is good, but it's not going to be so good to the point that it was able to lock in the bald eagle's head right away, especially through the whole snowstorm and then the backlit. So what I did is I custom my function 1 and 2 to do autofocusing, meaning dynamic small, dynamic large. And then once I lock it in with my middle finger and I guess you can call my ring finger, once it's able to lock it in, then I switch back to the autofocusing wide eye tracking with animal tracking enabled. And it was able to lock it in all the way. So, really, what I'm trying to tell you guys is, end of the day, the gear is good, but don't rely on it too much, right? There are things you still have to help it. Treat it like you still using a DSLR. So, another example, like I was shooting a tricolor heron or a wood duck, just very slow. And you see the reflection. This is the hood and merganser. So the eye auto tracking will not able to lock in the subject, especially when you have a perfect reflection. So what it did is going to lock in on the bottom where the reflection is at, because that's the closest to your focal length. So shot like this, you're going to have to do the the old school way, I would say the what do you call the dynamic tracking. For DSLR, it will be single point. So I mean, as far as can we jump to the Osprey? Do you have that one, Ronald? Okay, this is when I go back to why do I alternate? Okay, I tried A1, wasn't able to lock it in. R5, no. I mean, even Z9, if you doing the whole, I'm not saying the 3D tracking, but I'm saying the autofocus Y with animal 3D tracking enabled, so you narrow down the tracking field. But for the Osprey to come down at that speed, it wasn't able to trace quick enough to lock it in. So what I do is I alternate. My main tracking is always dynamic, small or large, and then once I see that Osprey lock it in my viewfinder, then I'll switch over to to the auto tracking Y focus. But sometimes I just go ahead and lock it in and do it like how you used to own the D5 or D6 or 1DX Mark 1, 2, 3. So
Tommy, do you find it better than because you're switching? I'm assuming that you don't want to track it with dynamic, small or large, all the way through. You think you'd have better success when it switches once it locks on with wide area. Is that what we're
well, that's why I'm still trying, Bill.
Yeah, okay.
I'm still trying to understand. Well, because I think it going back to on certain subject, right? For the Osprey, I feel that doing my own tracking, I was able to get the shot perfectly fine. So I don't want to go back to that old term where we say spraying and praying. I always told my student, don't spray and pray. So it's that deal where you know that you are able to lock in. Don't change it, especially with a bird as fast as like Osprey, Kingfisher and stuff. But if you have smaller, like slower subject or larger, I mean, like pelican, that's fine. Wood dove is fine. So you alternate. Your main focus, well, my main focus is dynamic, small. I shot that one in dynamic small, but as I seen it's already locked it in, then I switch over to the eye tracking. The auto focusing Y with eye track animal tracking enabled to be more clear.
Right.
So it's
I think it's.
I mean,
I don't think the mirrorless has changed this much. In that, I mean, back with the DSLRs, and I always taught, give up as much control as you need to, as it benefits you. If you're having trouble acquiring it with a simple autofocus mode, give up control. I've had to, even with DSLRs, I've had to turn it on to auto, and hope it picks something up out of the sky because I can't hardly keep it in the viewfinder. But I think the same holds true with the mirrorless, in that if you can do it with spot, which is like the simplest mode with no artificial intelligence and subject recognition or anything else, that's probably going to be your best result as far as focus goes. But how many times are you going to catch a wildlife in motion using spot and keep it on the eye, or even the head, much less the body, So it's one of those things you got to give up. And I'm like you. I've set dynamic as my default focus mode. And since the Nikon introduced the 153-point system with a D500, D850, D5, you've had the ability to have focus modes and activation on different buttons. And I've always done that since then. And I still do that here as well. I use
come in handy. Yes.
I use dynamic as my default. I find it's the quickest because it's not using artificial intelligence. It's just using straight up phase detection. And that doesn't mean it's particularly accurate. Like if it blows right past the focus point, it's going to go to the background and hunt back in and stuff. But if you don't have much time to acquire, dynamic mode is going to be your best bet to initially acquire focus. And then, the size of the dynamic area is going to depend upon how fast it is and how able you are to keep the subject within that area. For the things I've been doing, I've been using dynamic wide as my default, just because I'm lucky to hold them in the field of view for 5 frames. They're that fast or that close. And then I have one set to wide area, large, and I have another set to 3D, and I do have another button set to spot.
Yeah.
But I'm mostly using dynamic, and actually not switching to another mode or switching to 3D if I've got it enough time. I think 3D takes the most time for the camera to establish focus. But once it does, it's really good as long as there's a distinguishing feature for it to track.
Well, the reason why I tried that autofocusing Y system, besides being curious, I am to set my main default is on dynamic Y as well. But let's say a great owl coming straight at you, right? So as he's coming straight at you on the old school DSLR, what we're gonna do is we're gonna have to apply bumping technique. So you really gonna, for me, I bump my thumb like crazy just to get that thing keep locking in at the same time as I shoot. But now with the Z9, I noticed once I lock it in with the dynamic and then I switch over to the AF-Y focus, it was able to just, instead of me have to do the bumping, I get that chance, of that thing locking in as the owl's coming toward me. So I'm like, I see the good and the bad,
Absolutely.
So I mean, it's one of that deal where, okay, the bald eagle, same concept, yeah, it'll fly left and right, and then you can use the dynamic like the way we used to shoot. But then if it's coming toward you, when you at -30, you don't want to be keep bumping that thumb. Yeah, it's nice to have that feature right there. So I mean, and you can go ahead and switch it back as soon as you see that eye tracking is not really locking it in, because sometimes, you think it'll lock in, then it'll start picking up the snow, the snowflake in front of it. That's when you bounce it back. But what I'm trying to say, it's good to have that feature, right? Are they gonna be better near future? I'm pretty sure they will.
When you say switching, Tommy, do you mean that you have your camera set up for a one button push to wide area?
Yes.
You're not doing like the whole menu thing, right? You literally have a custom function button set up.
It's in the custom menu, and it's been doing that since the you can be doing that with the D500, the A50. It's where you engage certain button like function 1, it autofocus and it changed the focus point as well.
There is a setting
on AFC, I assume, and then you're tracking the dynamic area, small, medium, or large.
Yes.
And then once you think you have focus lock, or
you switch. You hit function 1 or function 2,
which bumps it into one area.
If it's a small bird, if it's small bird like Doug and stuff, then I do a function 1, so it's small, autofocusing small in with the tracking. But if it's a larger animal like a bald eagle or something, a pelican coming, then I switch it to the large. So it's all depend on my mood. But end of the day, to be honest, guys, you have to know the subject. I mean, all this technique, you can try it out, you can do everything, but if you 3 steps ahead of your subject, whichever one that you're shooting, you will be able to get the shot. Doesn't matter if it's osprey or a simple duck like mala.
There is another menu setting that's relevant to this, and that's that focus point persistence setting. I believe it's set on by default in the menus.
On, yes.
But
Auto.
that allows
On
that
and
you change mode, but it retains focus while you're doing it. It doesn't reinitiate autofocus. It just
No.
switches mode. Whereas if that setting's turned off, when you change to a different function button for autofocus mode and activation, it'll reinitiate, which is a little bit different. You could perhaps miss it. So you want to have that setting on. And no matter what you do, you're going to miss some shots. You know, It doesn't matter which camera, which DSLR, none of them are perfect, and the Z9's not either.
No.
And probably worth mentioning, the function buttons that Tommy's talking about are press and hold. You have to hold those.
Yes, you have to hold.
You can't release them. That's one of the things that a lot of people have put forward to Nikon, that it would be nice if you could set it either way, press and release so that it just sticks, or press and hold the way it currently is.
There's also another weirdness about that I've found, is that, like, I have dynamic on the shutter button, and I have 3D on the AF on. I have wide area large on function 1, and I have spot on function 2. You can press AF the shutter button for dynamic, and then press AF on to get 3D or whichever you have it programmed for. But I cannot then go from 3D to wide area large on the function button. It'll only switch between the shutter button and one alternate button.
Right.
I can't toggle through all of them.
No, and that's why it's good that Steven mentioned it, because most people get confused and they think that they can press both, and it's a big no, because you just telling your camera to do so much stuff that it's just gonna freeze on you. Especially,
you hold the shutter button and then you hit whichever alternate button you have programmed for the mode you want, and it'll override. But then to do anything else, you have to give up that override button, send it back to the shutter, and then pick another override.
So it's always good to practice press one button at a time. I mean, because sometimes I notice sometimes some of my students get panicked and they end up holding everything. They're like, my camera just went kind of dawn on me, and the screen just went blank, and that's what happened. So something to consider.
Tommy,
Right.
what about focus tracking with lock on? What kind of settings do you like there? The erratic, steady,
Oh, it's all depend, and I usually put erratic, right? And you know what? It's sometimes it's based on your subject too, and if it's in the tree or it's really in like wide open in the lake, So it's most of the time I put it locked in on 2, so it'll jump as I engage focusing. But that's just me,
Yeah.
Right.
So some people prefer put it on 5 because they stick longer.
You're totally subject dependent is how I would answer that, right? If you're shooting birds and they're going through busy backgrounds and you don't want to lose the bird, I'm setting it higher up. If I'm
5,
you're shooting Tommy's 2 bald eagles going at it, and you want the camera to jump back and forth between eagles, then go erratic and everything in between. So you kind of have to, it's not one of those set it and leave it functions. It's kind of what am I shooting today and what do I expect to be up against, and then play with it, because you'll get
It's funny. Those are settings that I set and leave. I do not mess with them. And since the D5, D500, D850,
Yeah,
I've set those. They changed the way those things work when they went to the 153 focus point system with the D5, and it's still the same in the Z9. It's not what it was with the D4 and the earlier cameras. In that,
So to be clear, I set mine on 2.
and you leave it, Tommy?
Yes, and I leave it most of the time. I leave it. Yes.
I leave mine set on 5 max delay and
Yeah.
erratic. Erratic tells the camera that if you lose it,
jump.
that
Yeah.
you're likely to lose it, not to jump quickly.
Right.
Okay, guys, we have 2 more topics.
Yeah, no time.
Yeah, we better go.
Custom functions. Which one should we go to next based on our conversation? The next 2 are shutter speeds and custom function buttons.
Well, there's so many options with custom functions, and they're so personal. I don't know that. I mean, we can all talk about how we have them set, and we kind of have as far as focus goes.
Why don't we do this then? Why don't we have Bogar? Do you want to talk about custom functions? And, maybe some tips about setting up custom functions, since we've been talking a little bit about it.
Oh, and before Bogart take over, I want to make sure you guys do know that the joystick, okay? If you guys do set an AF focus on the joystick, make sure you guys disable it to change your focusing point, okay? And even if you disable that button and set it as one of your AF focus button, try to just press it, because sometimes when you press it, you accidentally push up your camera, say this function is not enabled. So I guess my suggestion is try to avoid the joystick if you're gonna set anything, especially if you're not familiar with, using it. That's it. Go ahead, take over, Boger.
Yeah. Like Steven said, that the custom control is extremely personal preferences on that one, and it's a huge amount of options. I like to keep them a bit simple, not to get too lost. So I concentrate always on the main things I want to change when I'm out shooting birds. The birds I shoot the most is the black grouse, northern goshawk, the eagles, coppercale, and a bit bigger birds. And then I always, that's one of the examples. I'm really into the eagles, and then I always have my release on the shutter and the AF also on the shutter. I don't like the back button focusing. I find it unnatural to use because I'm an old rifle match shooter, so I'm used to use my finger as a trigger, and I have a tendency to have wide, large as a main setting for release. And I use the FN1 button for 3D tracking, because when you're locked on and you can go over to 3D, and I after Z9 I haven't lost a single shot, I think, on bigger birds when using 3D tracking. It's just stays on. But there again, it's about practicing with your equipment, and at least when you use, I use the 500 5.6 handhold sometimes, and to keep the subject in the frame is the task to do. But when it comes to custom functions, custom controls, there's so many options that I think everyone just need to ask questions if they have anything, because it's too much to go through.
Bogar, what are you using to lock on initially before you go to 3D tracking?
I use wide area large, and for birds, the scene recognition for animals with the Z9 is extremely good if the bird is not too small against a busy background. So for eagles and bigger birds like the ones we have most around here, that's really good one. For smaller birds like the tits and blue tits and those, I think it's crucial to have the bird big enough in your screen to really let the camera have something to work with. Because I've seen many people, they are taking pictures of small birds, and they are complaining that the bird is not in focus, and you get the bird is like 4% of the screen. It's impossible for any camera to keep on. It's just too small for it to recognize anything is going on. And the same with any brand. It's just impossible. And also small birds are so fast that there's no electronics in this world that's going to keep up with them. It's based on luck and practice, practice, and practice.
So Boga, let me ask you this. So let's say whenever you use the 3D tracking with the bald eagle, even when it came down and grabbed the fish, you still able to get it in the eye, locking in without any.
Pretty much. And I've seen your pictures of osprey, and it was I think it was Stephen who talked about it before you joined today, that it was going a bit on the drops when it went to the water. But the big difference between osprey and the bald eagles or sea eagles, like we have most of them, the white head like you have, it's they don't dive completely in the water, so you don't get the same amount of splash.
They use their talon, yes. They grab floater. Yeah.
So occasionally they go into the water if they are young and unexperienced. They just have some miss and they are submerged. But then I think the Z9 is quite okay to get it kept on even when they come up, or it's just so fast to recompose the focus that it's getting them. I had bigger problems with Olympus on that, because when everything, even small snow with Olympus, it was just impossible because it was chasing the snowflakes all the time. So for eagles, capercaillie, black grouse, and bigger birds, that's not any problems. But as you, Tommy, have realized, it can be a problem. But then I find the 3D tracking to stay more on the body when splashes or things coming in the way from it.
I see. Yeah.
Interesting. Okay. Shall we move to shutter speeds, the last topic?
Yeah,
Make sure there's no one have any question. So.
Anyone have any questions about custom functions?
Well, I mean, I do. I just want to get clear. So, Tommy, you use back button focus?
Yes.
And what do you have that set as?
Dynamic small.
Okay. And then what do you have? Do you have the shutter
my
button?
Function, my shutter button is only to shoot a photo.
Okay.
My function one is dynamic large wide. I'm sorry, auto focusing large wide with animal tracking enabled.
Okay.
Right, and then my function two is same thing but small.
Okay. And so initially you'll hit the back button to focus, and then you'll
most of the time I do my back button focus just like the old DSLR.
Right. But then you let go of that, and then you do another button. You don't.
That's only if I feel like the subject was, that's only if I feel like the subject is low enough for me to just playing with the auto focusing wide. Most of the time I still prefer that's why it go back to, why do you buy your gear, for what purpose? I mean, for me, I love the frame rate that I get with the D6, and I love the megapixel that I got with the D850. So that's why I got a Z9. Do I really get the Z9 for the whole 3D tracking? It's nice to have, but no. Yeah.
So you can still use it as like a DSLR. I guess that's what.
Yes. You can still use it like your D850, just more frame rate. Like Bill, you bust out 120 frame and you get that in focus. You don't miss anything. Yeah.
Okay. And then Borgen, I just want to ask you, so you have the shutter button programmed, right?
Yeah.
And you have it shut. And what's it programmed as?
Wide area large.
Wide area large. Okay. And then do you have the back button programmed as anything?
Yeah, I have, but I never use it. But
Okay.
I use that. I have that for single point
Okay.
focus.
And then you have the function button set as something else.
Yeah, the function 1 is for 3D tracking. I use that most of the time. I just make it to grab the focus, and
With
then
the-
I press function 1 to keep it in the.
So when you're
focus.
holding it and because you have to hold it down to focus, right?
Yeah.
You're still holding the shutter speed halfway down, and then you push the function button.
Yeah.
So you're holding it halfway down. So and then you just press it to take the picture.
Yes.
Okay.
And I'm experimenting with a slightly different. I was back button focused for all through DSLR days, like Tommy. I watched a webinar recently, and somebody was talking about switching. No need to be on back button focus anymore. Switch over to the shutter. So I have mine set up because I'm so used to focusing with the back button.
Mm-hmm.
I have that set up as wide area, and I have my shutter set up as 3D. And so I start tracking the bird coming at me by pressing my back button, which is wide area.
Okay.
And as soon as I let it go, because I'm already shooting with the shutter, it defaults to 3D. And
okay. So you
I'm
don't have to
trying-
hold it halfway down.
Well, you're already pressed because
You're
you're
already
shooting,
okay.
right?
Because I did actually today. I just tried it with the shutter one that you're doing, but it's
Yeah.
like works. So I just trying something different to see if it worked.
It's
So,
like
yeah.
starting all over again. And if it doesn't work, go back to your old DSLR modes and go
Okay.
into dynamic and just old school group area type stuff.
All right. Thank you.
And when you guys switch from one focusing mode to another, you're still pressing the AF on or the shutter, right? You're just pressing the second button to switch to the second focusing mode.
In
Right.
this
It always
case,
defaults to the shutter. You get the shutter button, whatever it's programmed to, and one override.
Okay.
Whichever override you choose is the one you get,
Okay.
and you have to let go of that and go back to the shutter
Okay. Got
before
it.
you can do anything else. And it's just we're almost out of time. So and it's kind of funny because you got 4 of us here and we're all different. Like I was never a back button person. I was like Borger. I never really found the benefit of back button. I didn't have problems with a half press. So I have my camera set up. The shutter's on dynamic mode, and I select the size of that area depending on how tough the subject is. I have the AF on set to 3D. I have the joystick set to focus lock. The little joystick on the back there.
Mm-hmm.
If you've got a fairly stationary subject, focus lock, it can be quite advantageous. We got function 1 set to wide area large, generally. And the function 2 is set to single point. Function 3 is set to silence. And for me, the function 3 is particularly important, and it's actually, I don't know why, but it's not a press and hold. You can just press it and release. It'll toggle between silent mode and audibles shutter. But when you're up close and you get the animal finally cooperates, and you got short distance, and you don't want that shutter alerting them, that silent mode's important.
Interesting. Do we want to talk about shutter speed, Stephen? Do you want to?
I can stay, but we're running over time. It's up to you and everybody else, I guess.
We'll just go over a little bit, I guess.
All right, sure. I think one thing we've all agreed on or mentioned in a roundabout way is that we all prefer to be hand-holding when we can. It's just wildlife and particularly birds are just too erratic to really be stuck on a tripod, and or too fast. But sometimes I don't like tripods. I prefer to be handheld, but I own 5 of them, and I use them when I have to. But because I prefer to be handheld, my rule of thumb is shutter speed twice focal length, double the old rule of thumb, and higher than that if I can get it. I only go less than that when I have to, and I try not to rely on IBIS or VR or anything else like that, because you're dealing with a moving subject, and IBIS and VR does nothing to help you with a moving subject. And this example picture here, the reason you want a higher shutter speed is so you can make use of the resolution of the sensor, the high resolution sensor we've got on the Z9 and the D850 and all the modern cameras have such high resolution sensors. This picture is zoomed in at 400% and still holds resolution. And that means 16 times more recorded resolution, image resolution, than an image that starts to go soft at 100% zoom. So if I can get a sharper image with more actual subject resolution recorded, then I don't need the really big, long, heavy lens as much. I can crop the sensor. I can make use of what I recorded better. As long as I have enough remaining. We were talking about the 11 megapixel JPEGs. I got 46 megapixels on this sensor, and I'm going to put it online at 2 megapixels or 4 megapixels or whatever. I've got a lot of options as long as I record a sharp image. And shutter speed's key with long focal lengths and hand holding.
So, Steven, do you mean that if you shot, this crane, you shot it do you remember what shutter speed?
Well, it would have been a minimum of 1250. I use aperture priority with auto ISO, and generally my minimum ISO is set to 500 because
Okay, so are you saying that if you shot the same image at 1/600, it would not be as sharp at 400%?
No, probably not, because
of motion blur, or because resolution somehow is less?
Motion blur. Even though it would look sharp at 100%,
yeah,
it won't look sharp at 400% because that little bit of motion blur causes a detail to cross 2 pixels. 2 pixels I don't normally see. Like those details that are there at 400%, I would not see if I was not zoomed in to 400%. So an image that's sharp at 100%, if it fails at 100% where it could be sharp at 400, that means you have not recorded as much resolution. What you get is a combination of technique, lens capability, and sensor capability. Whichever's the lowest is the resolution you record. And key to technique with moving subjects or handhold in particular, in high magnification, long focal lengths or short distances, is shutter speed. It's just like, really, long focal lengths is not much different than macro. If you've ever tried to shoot a high magnification macro handheld, you need a lot of shutter speed.
You need high shutter speed, yeah.
Yeah.
How often are you guys going past 100%, like 200% in large ones?
I do
not. Yeah.
If I can get high resolution like that, I will crop it. I can crop the image and use it instead of using a longer focal length. So what it gets me is not a better result. It's basically the same result of using a longer lens, because a longer lens is more magnification, which means more magnification of blur, more magnification of camera shape, more magnification of subject movement. So you record more blur and you get more diffraction blur. This is really another topic, but the whole thing here, my point is shutter speed is more important than we make it out to be. When you're doing high magnification stuff, the old one over focal length rule of thumb really starts to fall apart.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's the piece around shutter speed, Ronald, for creativity, right? If you throw up that snowy owl with the blurred wings with 1/60th of a second, a lot of times I've had the luxury of shooting snowy owls for over 10 years. It gets to the point where you want to get creative sometimes with your images. And so you can freeze the image at 3200 like I did with the 120 frames per second, but you can see the difference even with 160th versus the 60th. You get a totally different look than you otherwise would if you freeze the image. Now know that your keeper rate is going to go down the drain trying to get this shot, but I'm trying to experiment at that point. The light is dropping. I can't keep it to freeze it, and I think, hey, I can go home, or I can start trying to play with shutter speeds and get creative. And if I happen to nail a 1/60th, I'm going to get an image that I really like. So I play with it from an artistic point of view as well.
Same here. I usually like to paint with my camera. That's what I would have called it. So I love shooting bald eagle at 140 of a second. I even did 120. So you know, even when as he's moving, you know, it's just and to able to get this kind of shot, you have to. Well, I don't depend on the eye tracking. Let's just put it that way. I'll do mainly most of the tracking myself, and you have to hit the head pretty well to yeah.
There's a real sense of speed with this image that's up on the screen now that you wouldn't have if you froze the wings, right? In my opinion, this captures the essence of a bird in flight more so than freezing the wings. It's fun to get creative with this sort of thing.
Yes, yeah.
Well, does anyone have any questions for any of the speakers about anything we talked about?
Oh, I just have a question. What was the f-stop when you do those birds, the slow motion ones? What f-stop do you use?
Oh, as high as you can, and drop
okay.
your ISO as low as you can, and you can do that with a Nikon. Thanks to Nikon, you can drop the ISO as low as you can. Yes. So
I think Stephen would add too, by going wide open, you're going to get a sharper image out of it as well, right?
It at the focal plane, you know, when you a wider aperture is sharper than a smaller aperture due to diffraction, and at a certain point you get to what's called diffraction limiting, which limits the resolution of what you can see in the output image. But it actually diffraction limits the resolution way earlier than that at the pixel level on a camera, but then you're trading off small details versus large details. Like a lot of times it's worth going into diffraction, losing the really small details that you don't normally use or see because they're at 400% zoom in order to get larger details in the depth of field. So you can trade off having small details sharp, losing them to diffraction or slow shutter speed or whatever else in order to get larger details within the depth of field. It's a worthwhile trade-off sometimes.
I have a question concerning image stabilization.
Sure.
I normally try and shoot 1/2000th to 1/4000th when I'm shooting eagles. And due to arthritis, I use a gimbal head on a monopod.
Sure.
Do you have the image stabilization turned off on the monopod at those shutter speeds, or would you leave it on?
I would turn it off.
I usually turn it off when it comes to wildlife. I mean, unless you're doing video, David, I see no point, especially when you tracking the animal. You notice the image stabilization, let's say IS, or you know, it try to fix you. So your screen try to readjusting you. So it's one of that deal where I notice it make my tracking slower.
It also, so if it's lens-based IR, VR,
yeah,
The lens is going to be sharper, whichever system. But yeah, no, your lens will actually be sharper with it turned off, because when it's lens based, it corrects by moving optical elements, and if they're not centered, they're not precisely where they're supposed to be in the optical design. So you're
not shooting a model standing still. Your model is literally everywhere, and you try to counter that.
Large movements cause the elements to be far off center when the image is taken. Now the Z9 has a tendency to recenter when it goes to take the picture, which a lot of people have complained about. That unless you're in sport mode, I guess, on some of their new lenses.
No, I turned it off. Even my new lens, I turned it off. So
it's just like I said with the focus points for me. I only use it if I need to. Like I give up control, and that includes relying on VR instead of using a shutter speed or this, that, or the other. Only as I have to, or as it benefits me. And at those shutter speeds and with a moving subject, I don't see where it really would help you.
Okay. Thank you. It's been a great program.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Boga, when you're using a shutter button as a focus button as well, when you start shooting with the shutter, do you lose continuous focus at that point, or is it still continues to focus then?
Yep.
Yes, it does.
Yeah.
All right, because like Tommy, I use back button, exclusively.
Me too. I mean, if something don't work, you can try it out, but just end of the day, whatever you prefer, right? Whatever you use to thumb focus to shoot, then you just stick with it.
To initially go from shutter button to back button, it's like retraining your brain.
Yes, it's practice. Like me, most. Sometimes I seen people focusing with their left eye. I focusing with my right eye. Why? Because when I open both eye, I wanna able to see whatever I'm tracking the animal outside instead of just seeing my thumb. So it takes time to change those kind of behavior. So
I thought that was a dominant eye thing. Which eye you use to look through the lens.
Well, I track with both eyes, so it's coming handy. Yeah.
But you're crazy. Those 140th shutter speeds. I've been following you for years, and I don't know how you would.
Thank you.
On those things. You're just insane with what you do. It's amazing.
Yeah. Well, it started out by, I chase bald eagle up north, and most of the time, it's not the greatest weather. Hey, most of the time it's overcast with heavy storm coming in. And I don't want to be the guy that, hey, I'm just going to call it a whole entire week, stay in the hotel. No, I'm going to be out there, and I'm going to try to figure how to adapt to the environment, the situation, to get my shot. And that's why I push myself.
I think it comes down to portfolio kind of. If you think about it as if you've already got good eagle pictures, what's another eagle picture going to do for you? Whereas if you can do something creative, and step outside the box a little bit, you get a lot fewer keepers, but the keepers are unique.
You should always try to push yourself to the next level.
Hey, is that my friend Tony? I think Tony Nordstrom just joined. I told him that I'm going to do a presentation. Yeah.
Well,
he missed it.
I'm glad he just joined, but we're just about to end now. Thank you all for coming. This was a very interesting talk. I learned a lot of things. Thank you to all the speakers, Stephen, Tommy, Bill, and Bogart. And I'm going to post this talk in our group pretty much in about 2 hours when it gets downloaded. And feel free to continue the discussion in the groups. And good job, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Thank you, Ron. Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Hey, if you guys need tripod, look for me.
Okay. Thanks, Tommy.
What's the
I'm gonna take
discount?
I'm gonna take your word on that one.
Hey, I give you a discount, okay?
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.